The Galactic Council had a list, an unspoken, unwritten list of planets no species in their right mind would ever settle on. Worlds so hostile, so utterly unlivable, that even the most advanced civilizations wouldn't dare terraform them. They were classified in tiers, ranked by danger, and at the very top, beyond the acidic storms, crushing gravities, and rogue asteroid fields, was a place whispered about in hushed tones, a Class 15 Deathworld. A place where even the most aggressive war races never set foot. A world so ruthless it was assumed no intelligent life could ever come from it. Then, the Council discovered that humans were already living there. The revelation didn't come in a grand declaration. There was no distress beacon, no desperate signal for aid. Instead, it was a routine deep space survey drone that stumbled upon the impossible colony. Structures, energy readings, movement. The first scans didn't make sense. No life forms registered. No advanced technology flagged. Just a barren, inhospitable wasteland where temperatures swung hundreds of degrees in either direction and the air was laced with toxins. And yet, something was there. Something unnatural. Something alive. The Council panicked. They sent a team, an elite scientific detachment escorted by some of the most formidable warriors in the galaxy. They didn't expect to find much. Perhaps wreckage from a lost expedition, evidence of some primitive organism clinging to survival. What they found instead shattered everything they knew about survival, technology, and the very limits of biology itself. Humans. Thousands of them. Thriving. It wasn't a colony in the traditional sense. There were no massive domes, no environmental stabilizers shielding them from the chaos of the planet. The humans had adapted. Their bodies, their technology, their very way of life had evolved in ways the Council couldn't comprehend. They walked the wastelands in protective suits so advanced they looked more like living organisms than mere armor. Their cities weren't built to resist the elements. They worked with them, harvesting energy from the storms, using the violent winds to fuel their machines. Their defenses weren't walls or turrets, but a network of AI-driven systems that bent the very environment to their will. The Council delegation expected to find desperate survivors. Instead, they found masters of the impossible. At first, contact was cautious. The delegation approached, sending out carefully worded transmissions, prepared for either hostility or desperation. What they got was neither. The humans responded casually, almost amused. They weren't surprised to see outsiders. They'd been watching, monitoring, waiting. And as they finally spoke, one message became terrifyingly clear. They weren't stuck here. They chose to stay. That single realization sent shockwaves through the Council. No species had ever willingly remained on a Class 15 Deathworld. Not even in exile. And yet, humanity had made it their home. Worse, it wasn't some lost offshoot of their kind. The humans living here were advanced far beyond what the Council had previously classified their civilization as. Their technology wasn't just on par with the great empires of the stars, it surpassed them in ways that defied logic. Energy shielding that adapted in real time. Starships that didn't just navigate gravity wells, but manipulated them. Medical advancements that made injuries irrelevant. The implications were terrifying. For years, the Council had debated the potential threat of humanity. They were an anomaly, a species that had risen rapidly, spreading faster than most, adapting to hostile environments with unnerving ease. But they had been contained. Or so the Council had believed. The humans of the core worlds, the colonies known to the wider galaxy, played by the rules. They traded, they negotiated, they engaged in politics like any other civilization. But now, the Council realized an unsettling truth. The humans they had been monitoring were just a fraction of the whole. Here, on the most lethal world ever recorded, was proof that humanity wasn't just surviving the worst the universe had to offer. They were thriving in it. And then came the question no one wanted to ask. If these were the humans, the Council hadn't known about what else were they hiding? The delegation, once confident in their mission, suddenly found themselves out of their depth. Every scan, every analysis, every careful probe into human technology only raised more questions. Their ships were old, but only in appearance beneath the surface. They operated on principles the Council's brightest minds couldn't even begin to decipher. Their defenses looked primitive until the first automated drone attempted to breach their perimeter and was disassembled at a molecular level before it could get within a kilometer. And then there were the humans themselves. They were different, stronger, faster, more resistant. Some of them moved in ways that defied physics, their suits enhancing their bodies beyond natural limits. Others didn't wear suits at all, walking through the lethal atmosphere as if it were nothing. The scientists insisted it was impossible. No known species could withstand such extremes. But then, humanity had never cared much for what was supposed to be possible. The Council's fears weren't paranoia. This was something else entirely. Humanity wasn't a species simply learning to survive in the galaxy. They were mastering it. And that terrified the powers that had long ruled the stars. Because if humans could do this, if they could turn a Deathworld into their domain, evolve beyond the limits of biology, create technology that made the greatest empires look primitive, then what would happen if they decided to expand? The delegation was no longer here to observe. They were here to contain, to ensure that whatever was happening on this forsaken world stayed buried. But deep down, they already knew the truth. It was too late. The lead scientist of the delegation, a XLR named Velnix, struggled to make sense of the readings scrolling across his datapad. His species prided itself on logic, on an unshakable understanding of the physical universe. But this was something else. Every scan of the human settlement contradicted known science. The structures had no centralized power source, yet energy flowed through them in perfect balance. The environmental readings fluctuated wildly, but the humans walked through it unbothered. Even the materials their ships were made of, somehow both ancient and impossibly advanced, defied classification. Velnix wasn't the only one unnerved. Captain Ralvek, a hardened veteran from the Drakari Legion, had been skeptical of the mission from the start. His people were warriors, battle-tested and ruthless, and he had fought in more conflicts than he could count. But even he had to admit this was different. The humans here weren't warriors in the traditional sense. They didn't carry the weapons of conquerors, didn't march in formation like the great armies of the Council races. But the way they moved, the way they watched it, was as if they already knew every possible threat before it even happened. As if they weren't afraid of anything. Ralvek's instincts told him something was wrong. "Keep your distance," he warned his soldiers. "Don't provoke them. We don't know what we're dealing with." And that was the truth. They didn't. The humans had agreed to a meeting, but they hadn't come to the delegation's ship. Instead, they had invited them into their settlement. That alone was strange. Normally, a species with something to hide would insist on neutral ground, would negotiate from a position of control. But these humans? They welcomed the delegation in as if they had already won whatever silent battle was being fought. As they entered the human city, Velnix couldn't help but marvel at its design. It wasn't sleek or towering like the spires of the core worlds. It was efficient, seamlessly integrated into the hostile landscape. The buildings absorbed and redirected the brutal winds, using them to generate power. The streets were clean not because of maintenance drones, but because the very design of the city prevented debris from accumulating. Every structure had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. And the people. They were different from the humans the Council had studied before. There was something in their eyes, an awareness, a confidence that bordered on unsettling. These were not desperate survivors, clinging to life on a nightmare world. They were something else. Something more. A tall human approached, flanked by two others. His face was weathered but unreadable, and when he spoke, his voice carried the calm authority of someone who had seen things no outsider could comprehend. "You must have a lot of questions," he said, his gaze sweeping over the delegation. "I imagine you're wondering how we're still alive out here." Velnix cleared his throat, trying to maintain diplomatic composure. "Your presence on this world is unexpected. The Council believed no sentient species could survive in such conditions." The human smiled, but there was something in that smile, something almost amused. "We get that a lot," Ralvek folded his arms, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. You've adapted in ways we don't understand. Your technology, your biology. This isn't normal. What are you hiding? The human's expression didn't change. Nothing. We just learned to play by different rules. The way he said it sent a chill down Velnik's spine. There was no arrogance, no posturing. Just certainty. Behind them, a gust of wind howled through the settlement, kicking up a cloud of dust. But unlike in the wastelands, here the dust didn't linger. It was redirected, funneled into hidden vents that dispersed it harmlessly. Every detail of the city, every aspect of its construction, seemed impossibly precise. Velnix tried again. Why stay here? You clearly have the knowledge to settle more hospitable worlds. Why choose to live in one of the most dangerous environments in the galaxy? The human's gaze didn't waver. Because we had to. Because we wanted to. Ralvek narrowed his eyes. That's not an answer. The human exhaled slowly, glancing toward the horizon, where a storm was gathering in the distance. You think this world is dangerous, he said. And it is. But danger isn't something we fear. It's something we understand. Something we use. Velnix exchanged a glance with Ralvek. There was an implication beneath those words, something deeper, something unsettling. Before either of them could respond, the wind shifted. A low hum vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. The human's expression darkened. They found us, he murmured. Ralvek stiffened. Who? The human turned to him, and for the first time, there was something sharp in his expression. The ones who didn't want us to survive. Velnix's datapad flickered. New readings. High-energy signatures approaching from orbit. Multiple vessels. Not council ships. Something else. Something unknown. Ralvek's instincts screamed at him. This was wrong. This was all wrong. The human sighed, rolling his shoulders. Well, he said almost to himself, I suppose it was only a matter of time. He turned to the delegation, his expression unreadable once more. You should leave, he said. Now. Velnik's throat went dry. What's coming? The human's eyes locked onto his. And this time, there was no amusement, no patience. Something worse than a death world. The air changed. Not in a way that Velnix could measure with his instruments, but in a way that sent a primal warning through his nerves. A stillness, an anticipation, like the very planet itself was waiting for something. The humans felt it too. The leader, no name given, no formal title, exchanged a look with his people. No panic, no alarm. Just quiet understanding. Ralvek's instincts screamed at him to act. His soldiers shifted uneasily, hands hovering near their weapons, but they knew better than to draw first. This wasn't a battlefield they understood, and for the first time in his career, Ralvek wasn't sure who had the advantage. The sky darkened. Not from clouds, but from something else. Shadows rippled high above, flickering against the storm-choked atmosphere. Ships. Dozens of them. Their energy signatures were unfamiliar. No known faction in the council had vessels shaped like these, long and angular, with dark hulls that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. They don't belong to you, Ralvek said, watching the humans closely. It wasn't a question. The leader didn't answer right away. He just exhaled, slow and steady, as if bracing for something inevitable. No, he said. They don't. Velnix felt cold. Then who are they? The human's jaw tightened. The reason we stayed. Above them, the ships descended, slipping through the thick atmosphere like knives through cloth. No communications. No threats. Just silence. And that was worse. The council had protocols, diplomacy, negotiations, everything that made conflict predictable. But this felt like something older. Something personal. Ralvek had fought many wars, but he had never seen a force act like this, deliberate, precise, completely uninterested in grand displays of power. These ships didn't come to intimidate. They came to finish something. The realization made his blood run cold. The leader turned to the delegation. Your ship, how fast can it leave orbit? Velnix barely processed the question. Whoa, what? You need to leave, the human said. Now. Ralvek's hands clenched into fists. We don't run from a fight. The human looked at him, not with challenge, not with scorn, but with something far worse, pity. This isn't your fight, he said. Above them, the first ship touched the upper atmosphere. A ripple of energy cascaded outward as something invisible flickered around its hull, a barrier, a shield, something far more advanced than anything the Council possessed. Ralvek knew military power when he saw it, and this was it. These weren't scavengers or warlords. They were executioners. The delegation's comms crackled. A voice from the ship's bridge panicked, strained. Captain, unknown vessels locking on. We're detecting the signal cutout. Velnix's datapad pulsed with frantic readings. The unknown ships weren't targeting the settlement. They were targeting them. The leader turned to his people, giving them a single nod. The humans moved without hesitation, splitting off in different directions, their movements sharp and rehearsed. This wasn't a colony caught off guard. This was an army activating. Ralvek's mind raced. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing: staying here was a mistake. He turned to Velnix. We're leaving. Now. Velnix hesitated. His scientist's mind wanted answers, wanted to stay and understand. But something deeper, something instinctual told him the human was right. Above them, the lead ship unleashed something. Not a weapon. Not yet. But a pulse. It spread through the sky like an invisible wave, and every system Velnix carried glitched at once. His datapad flickered. His visor display scrambled. Even his implants, designed to function in any condition, went dark. An EMP? No. Worse. Something smarter. Ralvek growled in frustration, tapping his comms. Get the ship ready. Full power. Now. Static. The leader sighed. Told you. Ralvek gritted his teeth. Then what's your plan? The human just smirked. Survive. Something struck the atmosphere, silent but heavy, a force that rippled through the ground. A moment later, the sky split. It wasn't an explosion, not in the way Ralvek had seen before. It was something deeper, a tearing, as if space itself was being pulled apart. And through that wound in reality, something else emerged. Velnix's breath hitched. His translator failed. His mind refused to process what he was seeing. Not ships. Not in the way the Council understood them. These things were alive. Ralvek had seen many horrors in his time. But as the sky cracked open and something vast and wrong began to descend, for the first time in his life, he felt something he never thought he would. Fear. The sky was wrong. That was the only way Velnix could describe it. The thing descending wasn't a ship, wasn't a structure, it was something else entirely. It moved like liquid, shifting and twisting in ways that made no sense. Parts of it shimmered in and out of visibility, as if reality itself struggled to contain it. The air grew thick, humming with an energy that pressed against his skull. His instincts screamed at him to look away, but he couldn't. None of them could. Ralvek's grip tightened around the handle of his sidearm. It was a useless gesture, he knew that, but instincts were instincts. Warriors didn't just stand when confronted with something unknown. They prepared. But this? There was no preparation for this. The human leader, still eerily calm, studied the entity above them. His people weren't panicking, weren't running. They were watching. Waiting. And that terrified Velnix more than anything. You've seen this before, Ralvek said, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. The human nodded. Oh yeah. Velnix turned sharply. And you stayed here? You knew this thing, this entity was coming, and you just let it happen? The leader exhaled, glancing toward his people as if considering how much to say. Then he looked back at the alien presence descending toward them, his expression unreadable. It was never about stopping them. He nodded toward the delegation's crippled ship, still flickering with residual interference. It was about making sure the rest of you saw it. Velnix felt something cold settle in his stomach. Above them, the entity shifted again, stretching impossibly far, its form warping like liquid metal caught between dimensions. And then, sound. Not an explosion, not a screech, but something deeper. A vibration that resonated through bone, through air, through the very fabric of space. The settlement structures trembled, energy fields flickering under the weight of it. Ralvek staggered, his soldiers barely holding formation. "What is that?" The human leader didn't answer. He simply raised a hand to his ear, an old-fashioned radio device, something primitive by council standards. "Mark?" he said. A crackling response. "We're locked." "Send it." For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the sky changed. A second force emerged, silent, invisible but unmistakable. The air snapped, a pressure shift so sudden that Velnix gasped. Something was pushing back. The entity above them, the thing that had cracked reality itself, paused. Ralvek felt it. The tension, the sudden shift in balance. The humans had done something, triggered something, and whatever had been descending upon them was now hesitating. And then movement. Not from the entity, from above it. A formation of human vessels, sleek and almost unregistered on Velnix's scanners, dropped through the sky. Not like they had been launched, but like they had been waiting there all along. The entity reacted. Its form flickered, twisting, but the humans moved first. A pulse rippled through the air. No explosion, no lasers, just a shockwave of something unseen. The entity shrieked, its form buckling, distorting as if reality itself was rejecting it. Ralvek had fought many wars, but he had never seen an enemy wounded by existence itself. The leader turned to Velnix, expression neutral. "You wanted to know why we stayed." Velnix could barely process words. "You planned for this?" A thin, knowing smile. "Not the first time we've had visitors." Ralvek's heart pounded. This wasn't a random attack. This wasn't just another alien threat. The humans hadn't just survived on this death world. They had been baiting something here. The entity howled, not in sound, but in space itself. The air vibrated, the ground trembled, and for a brief moment the sky itself fractured, revealing something beneath it, something vast, ancient, watching. Velnix felt his entire body seize, his mind screaming against the impossibility of what he was witnessing. Reality was wrong, unraveling at the seams. And yet, the humans stood firm. Above them, their ships moved with precision, shifting their formation in a way that seemed almost choreographed. Another pulse rippled outward, not a weapon, not energy, but something else. The entity recoiled, its form spasming, fighting against something unseen. Ralvek forced his body to move, stepping closer to the human leader. "What are you doing to it?" The human didn't look away from the sky. "We're showing it the door." A blinding arc of energy lashed from the entity toward one of the human ships. It never landed. The moment the energy struck, the ship shimmered phased, as if it had never truly been there at all. The attack simply passed through, leaving the vessel untouched. Velnix's brain struggled to keep up. That's not shielding. That's reality displacement, the human finished. He glanced at him, the first flicker of true emotion crossing his face. "You think we survived here by accident?" Another pulse. This time, the entity screamed. Its form began to collapse inward, folding into itself, warping like a dying star. The pressure in the air thickened, crushing, suffocating then, suddenly, it snapped. The sky was whole again. The entity was gone. Silence. For the first time since they had arrived, there was nothing unnatural in the air. No static hum, no trembling ground. Just the eerie quiet of a world that had momentarily touched something it was never meant to. Ralvek let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His soldiers exchanged glances, wary, uncertain. Velnix still struggled to process what had happened. The human leader turned toward them. "You'll want to send a message back to the council," he said. "Tell them what you saw." Velnix blinked. You mean that you stopped it? The human's smile was grim. No. He glanced back at the sky, at the space where the entity had disappeared. Tell them it's not over. Ralvek frowned. What do you mean? The human's radio crackled. A voice came through, urgent. Mark, here. We're picking up residual anomalies. Something's shifting. The leader nodded, unfazed. How many? A pause. Then, more than before. The human exhaled, turning back to Ralvek and Velnix. You should really get off this planet. Above them, the sky darkened again. Only this time, it wasn't just one entity forming. It was dozens. Velnix's breath caught in his throat as the sky churned, the darkness twisting into something deeper than shadow. More of them. More than before. The air grew heavy again, that same unbearable pressure sinking into his bones. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. Ralvek's soldiers were already retreating toward their damaged ship, moving fast despite the uncertainty of whether their systems would even function after the interference. His mind raced. The humans had held their ground against one entity somehow. But against this? The human leader's radio crackled again. They're forming faster, Mark said. Something's different this time. The leader nodded, his expression unreadable. They've adapted. Velnix turned sharply. Then why are you still standing here? Why aren't you running? The human finally met his gaze, and for the first time, Velnix saw something beyond confidence, something deeper. A quiet understanding, a grim resolve. Because this is what we do. Ralvek clenched his fists, his mind struggling to make sense of it all. The humans had known this would happen. They had expected it. And they hadn't called for help. They hadn't tried to escape. They had stayed. The realization settled into him like a weight. You've been fighting them for years, haven't you? The human leader gave the smallest nod. Long enough to learn how they think. He turned back to the growing darkness. Long enough to know they never come all at once. This was just a test. The words sent a chill through Velnix's body. If this was only the beginning, then what was coming next? The wind shifted, and the ground trembled beneath them. More pulses of unseen energy rippled through the air, disrupting scanners, distorting light. The humans were already moving, their fleet adjusting positions, their technology warping the very fabric of space to counter whatever was trying to break through. Velnix felt small. For the first time in his life, he truly understood the scale of what he was witnessing. Ralvek's voice was tight. If they keep coming, if they don't stop, what's your plan? The human leader exhaled, watching as the sky twisted further. We do what we always do. His gaze was steady. We hold the line. The words rang in Velnix's ears. The sheer weight of them. And then, without another word, the humans stepped forward, toward the storm, toward the impossible. They weren't running. They weren't retreating. They were facing it. As Velnix and Ralvek's crew scrambled to escape, the last thing they saw before the ship's doors sealed shut was the humans, standing firm against the growing abyss. Fighting, not for survival, but because it was the only way to make sure the rest of the galaxy never had to.